Hi, everybody. This is Matthew Pose of Pose Acoustics, and I'm going to do a presentation that I am going to be presenting this Saturday. This will go live after I've already done the presentation, and it's about immersive spaces, basically, and how we can create engineered, optimized spaces with predictable results. I'm actually playing around with StreamYard right now because we're looking to start to do live streams. So when you guys watch this, let me know if you like that idea. I think you're going to say yes, and we'll get some guests in. The software has a lot of capabilities. It's just for anyone who uses it, it is fairly expensive. And so we're trying to make sure it makes sense to do that. So I'm going to add in my presentation. Here we go. So from concept to concert, designing immersive audio spaces at home. So all of you, I think if you think about what is the end goal of doing a AV system, it's that you want to recreate that real event, whether it's home theater and the real event is the movie, or it's music and the real event is whatever the musical experience is supposed to be. It is at its core this real event that we're trying to recreate as realistically as possible. And music was one where I think there was always an analog that was easy to talk about. And that was a live concert. So we know what a live concert is. They may not be as popular as they used to be in terms of the classical concerts like a symphonic hall, but they exist. We know what that is, and we understand what we're trying to recreate. And I think if you're realistic, if you're really honest with yourself, and you've heard an actual concert hall, full symphony, you will agree most home sound systems don't do a very good job recreating it. The size is wrong, the scale is wrong, the sound is wrong. None of it is really right. Some get closer than others, but anybody who's going to claim that what they've got in their home is a near perfect reproduction of what they hear live, I just don't believe it. I've never heard it. So the goals of this particular session are to get into how we can try to design systems where we have a predictable result at the end and that we achieve that recreation of the real event. So the session goals here, like I said, are for you to kind of understand how we do this in my industry. One of the first things I want to get at is that we actually get the sales process wrong. And as integrators and designers, it doesn't do our clients, many of you being clients or potential clients, it doesn't do you a great service to do this wrong like this, but it's actually the way you often will enter the process as well. And so I think we have a responsibility to help refocus clients in on what needs to happen to get a good result. And one of the key things is we got to get away from the product, because the product is just a tool, but often it's looked at as instead of a means to an end, it is the end. And we don't want to do that. I want to talk about why design matters, because you can actually fill a room with state-of-the-art gear and it won't be any good. And that's a problem that not everybody understands. Why immersive audio matters. So I don't know that it's well understood why we do things the way we do and why surround sound has become the de facto standard in home theater. It actually should be with music reproduction too. But we have become so obsessed with this traditional approach to channel that we've lost sight of what it actually takes to recreate the original musical event. Why predictability matters. So I think a lot of people think of it as, well, can't I just put stuff in there? And if I don't like it, I change it. But the problem is that's not a great approach, especially not for somebody like me. As an end consumer, you can get away with that. As a designer, you can't. I mean, how would you like it if I designed your system, you don't like it, and I said, well, we thought that might happen. Let's try again. And then how do we get there from here? I mean, how do we actually make this happen, and what do we need? I'll just tell you right now, we don't have all the data we need. It's not made available to us. But that doesn't mean we shouldn't strive to do it in this way. All right, so I'm not Tom Cruise, but it's become a running joke in doing these presentations with CEDIA that we pick a picture of a star that looks kind of like us, maybe a little bit if you squint. And so mine ended up being apparently Tom Cruise, but I am Matthew Pose, owner of Pose Acoustics, have over 20 years in the audio video industry, home theater engineer and designer specializing in high performance systems. I'm a volunteer on the CEDIA's RP10 committees, focusing on acoustic measurements and design. I do world-class projects all over the world, including Los Angeles, Dubai, Miami, and London. I have additional work as a freelance reviewer and technical editor for I've done with Audioholics, AV Nirvana, and the past Sound and Vision. I am a lifelong hobbyist with a passion for movies and music. So many of you who watch my channel are lifelong hobbyists as well. And the reality is I got into this starting there, just like all of you. And I remain just as into it, other than when you do it for a living, I think you find you have way less time to be that hobbyist than you used to. And then dedication to perfection and dedication to perfection and innovative audiovisual solutions. So my approach with my company has been to try to be as no compromising as possible in the areas that matter. It's too easy to just say, well, who's really going to notice or who really cares? Reality is, I probably care more about your system than you do. And I think that's a good thing. And that is my approach. All right, so this was thrown in as a joke. We've been using AI for a while to generate images for these videos because using real client system pictures is often a big no-no, and it's hard to get permission to do that. So AI is not very good yet. It's amazingly good for what it can do, but when it comes to image generation, the best of them are still not quite there yet. And so I asked it to create a space. It's for a project where we're going to actually be making the room match the rest of the house. And the design of the house has that modern prairie style of construction. And so Frank Lloyd Wright, for those who don't know where that came out of. And I wanted to come up with a theater design, and I needed some inspiration for what a theater might look like if it was designed using that Frank Lloyd Wright-esque look. And so I put in everything, including some real Frank Lloyd Wright living rooms as feeder pictures to use for design. This is using Firefly from Adobe. And I said it's a home theater, and this is what it gave me. So there's a TV on the side wall, and then there's a screen on the front wall. Why you would have a TV on the side wall of this theater along with a screen on the front wall, I don't know. It also doesn't match what I requested, which was a screen that goes basically side to side on the wall. What you gonna do? All right, so back to the sales thing. Often we go from selling products and then talking about the specifications of what you need. So we prepare a quote based on the products that you chose in the initial sales process and not based on your needs. And one of the problems with that is that even if I get you the best of a type of product there is, the best in-ceiling speaker, the best in-wall speaker, the best in-room speaker, the best amplifier, that doesn't mean that that's the best speaker for you or the best amplifier for you for your needs. It could be budget constraints. It could be performance constraints. You know, there are products out there. There is no perfect speaker, right? So there's speakers out there that sound amazingly good, but actually the speakers don't work very well in all conditions. For instance, they may not play very loud. And by very loud, again, they may play more than loud enough for most of your use. But if you're sticking them into a large room and you want to be able to reproduce cinema reference levels, they can't do that. So that's probably the wrong speaker for you, even if it's an amazing speaker in every other way. So really what we need to be getting into, and I'm noticing this is loading totally wrong on this, but you can kind of see what it was trying to say, is that we need to stick to a standards-based approach where we start with engineering. The very first thing we need to do during that discovery process is talk to you, the client, and say, what is this room? What are we using it for? Tell me about your life. Tell me about the house. Tell me about your past. Like, what are some rooms you've had in the past you liked and didn't like, and why? Once we understand those questions, we can start to get into the user interface side of the design. And so we can start to think of it in terms of what are your objectives and how do you want to use it? This is really important for things way beyond AV. When it comes to things like automation, shades, and lighting, we often talk about it from the standpoint of, well, I'm going to get you a really cool touchscreen on the wall. Most clients don't want a touchscreen on the wall. And in fact, what I say is the best light switch is no light switch. You want to walk into a room and the lights know they're supposed to turn on. It shouldn't require a light switch. But for many people, that may not be an option. And quite frankly, the technology is not 100% there for that to work yet the way you'd want it to. People are going to say motion sensors, but let's be realistic. Those things suck. There's nothing smart about them. Engineer and so then we have to get into an engineering and user experience process where we create from the products what this system is going to look like and be. Once we understand what our design goals are and what our requirements are for the system, we can begin to specify what those products are going to be. So you start with, well, what do I need the product to do? Like, do I need it to hit 105 dB continuously at a distance of 20 feet? If I do, that's a very specific type of speaker, right? Once I know that and that goes into my design brief, I can get into specifications. It's a mind shift in how we do things. But this is something that should be true whether you're a consumer or an engineer. This is how we should design systems. Don't go by what some YouTuber, myself included, tells you is the right speaker to buy, because it may not be the right speaker for you. And I don't design that way. Go with what is it you need that speaker to do for your system to give you the experience you're looking for. And then identify which, there's not going to be one, there's probably going to be a bunch. So which set of speakers is capable of that? Those that aren't capable of that, they should be crossed off the list, even if they're good in other ways. This is not working. We will go to 9. Here we go. I don't know why I did that. So let's think of it another thing here. What's the best car in this list, right? I mean, many of you are going to get charged up, especially those of you that are really into cars, and they're going to say, well, I really like the Bugatti, or I really like the Aston Martin. It's a classic, whatever. The answer is that's an opinion, right? The right answer is that these are all really good cars in different ways. What is the best car for you depends. The other side of this, which I don't have a slide for, would be to say, like in my own life, none of these would be a very good car for me, for my family life, right? Like I can't take my kids to soccer in those. We just recently actually had to go and we took my daughter to Legoland, and we brought a friend of hers there. And so it was my wife and myself, both of my kids and their friend, right? That none of those are going to handle that trip well. Not only would it be uncomfortable, they're 2-person cars. So what's best for you may not be what's best overall. And then even within a particular category, like a supercar or a sports car, what's best is going to really depend on your perspective, your opinion, and what you're looking to get out of it. Now, RP22 was something that I think it was designed for immersive spaces. It applies to music and movies, but most people think of it as something related to home cinemas, and I think ignore it for music. The principles of it apply to a 2-channel system just as much as they do to a multi-channel immersive space. And as I said, I actually think there's an argument that immersive audio is what we should be doing for music reproduction as well. It's a design and engineering focused best practices for immersive spaces. The focus applies to movies and music, but more standards exist for movies than music. In other words, we're giving you best practices, but at the end of the world, a lot of those best practices stem from industry standards, and there just aren't the same kinds of standards for music production and reproduction that there are for movies. So it's a little bit more Wild West for music. Many principles can apply to 2-channel or immersive audio. And I think that's important to understand, that even if it's talking about it in terms of immersive spaces, even if it's talking about it in terms of multiple speakers, that doesn't mean it doesn't apply to a 2-channel system as well. So one of the key things to know is it defines 4 levels of system performance based around 21 objective criteria. Objective meaning they're measurable, and they all are. So none of the criteria are the speaker has to sound good. They're specific criteria that allow us to know that the end result should sound good, but there is an art to this as much as there's a science in identifying the right products, not just in terms of performance specifications, but in terms of what's going to meet your definition of sounding good is another step that goes beyond what this does. So in terms of the 4 levels, think of it as sort of a good, better, best, bestest, except that you shouldn't think of good as bad in any way. The level 1 was meant for more basic spaces with lower budgets, smaller rooms, and lesser equipment. Level 2 is actually a very high performance space. To give you an idea how high performance, my home theater is a level 2. It meets level 3 and 4 in many criteria, but I don't have enough speakers for it to achieve level 3 and 4. So because of that, I don't have enough spatial resolution, basically. I'm level 2. You can achieve level 2, and I think most people would find that to be an extremely high performance system by most normal standards. Level 3 is reference level, so that's equaling or bettering that of what you would get in a commercial cinema or a dubbing stage. So it's following those standards. Level 4 is taking it up a notch from there. So higher SPL levels, tighter tolerances, wider dynamic range, everything gets a little bit better. This is audio focused, not video focused, but there is a separate one, RP23, that's for video. Each criteria is predictable during the engineering design, and once RP32 is complete, measurable at a handover. What that means is that you can take everything that we're doing in those criteria, and you can predict from that what you're going to get as an end result. You can then use the same kinds of criteria to measure a system and show a client or yourself that you've achieved what you set out to achieve. Now, this shows the balancing performance objectives around some broad characteristics that are important for good sound. And so you've got things like spatial resolution, timbre, and dynamics. You know, you've got localization, accuracy, sound movement, immersion. in envelopment, audio coverage, dialogue clarity, tonal balance, sound isolation, bass impact, and dynamic range. All of these are important. There's no way to achieve all of them to perfection. And then the other part of this to think about is that as your budget goes down and you need to make compromises, you should look at this wheel basically and say, what from here am I willing to go down on? So just as an example, in my own system, because of budget constraints, I looked at this and I said, well, I'm willing to go down on spatial resolution because I actually think that I'm going to be less bothered by a lower amount of spatial resolution than I am, which primarily I think is going to affect localization accuracy and sound movement. And I think the brain is going to overcome a lot of that on its own versus things like timbre. So I think that if timbre is negatively affected because of the speaker choices I make, that I'm not going to like that. I think that things like sound isolation, bass impact, and dynamic range are also things that my brain's not going to make up for, and I want those to be good. So I maxed those out, and I gave up on some of spatial resolution. I still have pretty high spatial resolution. It's a 7.1.4 system that uses waveforming, so there's 4 subwoofers in the front and 2 in the back. Audio coverage would be arguably another area that I went down on. So audio coverage is slightly worse because there's just not enough channels for perfect audio coverage. But I have 1 really good seat and I have 2 other pretty good seats and 6 total seats, all of which are probably more than fine for most people, right? And that was how I made my balanced choices. This is an example of the specifications. So NCB ratings for the noise floor. In a level 1 system, we say somewhere between 26 recommended and 35, all the way to a level 4 that's 15 recommended, 18 max. For those who don't know, those are very quiet numbers and very hard to achieve. My room, we actually measured with everything off. It's around NCB 10 to NCB 11. However, once you turn on the projector, the equipment was on during that measurement because it's in another room, and the HVAC is running, the number goes up. So without the projector and the HVAC running, it's around NCB 12 or 13. With the projector on, it's like NCB 20, something like that. Projector needs to go in a box. That was my own being cheap. This is an example of an acoustic specification. All right, so RP1, in order for us to be able to take data and use that data to predict what a room's performance is going to be like, to achieve that concert-like musical experience, we need data from manufacturers. So one of the problems we have is that if you go and you look at a speaker, 3 different speaker companies may give you max SPL, for instance, but they don't tell you how they measured it. And there's a lot of ways to measure them, and they're not similar. And the results you get are very different as a result of them not being similar. So RP1 is about setting about a set of standards for what we want manufacturers to send us for data to use in our predictions. And it would make it so that the data is more similar. So as an example, we may do an AES 75 measurement. All right, so back to RP1. Sorry, I lost my camera for a moment. So with RP1, it's about getting data that's presented in a predictable way. So we don't typically get the data in a predictable fashion that is consistent across manufacturers that allows us to use that information in our designs. It's very all over the place. Even frequency response, they'll tell you something like the speaker's got a frequency response from 20 hertz to 20 kilohertz. And then what they don't tell you is that it's minus 10 dB at those extremes. They don't tell you the directivity index. They don't tell you what the spatial, what the response looks like at different angles. They just give you very little data. Getting CTA 2034 data is very difficult. Sometimes you get CTA 2010 data, but like with subwoofers, we tend to only get one kind of data, which is the burst test data. And that's not actually all that useful for how to figure out what subwoofer, for instance, is the best subwoofer to use in your room. And it's a really common issue that we have. So RP1 is going to help standardize that information to make sure that we're getting the data that we need. And that's because without data with which to make engineering predictions, we cannot do our jobs objectively and correctly. So as mentioned before, when we think about what we're trying to achieve with the system, we need to go through a process. That discovery process, whether it's for yourself or for a client, starts with having a conversation, again, with yourself or with a client as to what you're trying to get, what the expectations are about this. And I think you need to be honest with yourself when you're having this conversation, either with an integrator or on, again, thinking about it with yourself, talking with your spouse, your partner. how are you going to use this room? I have so many people who are like, I want a dedicated home theater, but when it comes right down to it, they don't. What they really want is a space that's more usable by their family overall. All right, we lost our camera again, but I got that going. So yeah, you want to talk about your use case, make sure you understand how you want to use this. Then you want to think about seating. I mean, again, it's easy to say you want 20 seats, but first off, does your room support 20 seats? And what compromises is that going to create? In many cases, putting too many seats in a room may make it so there's no one good seat. And that's, to me, that's like the biggest sin you could commit, is to have no good seats. Then you want to talk about your strategy for bass. Are we doing four subs in the corners? Are we doing a bass array in the front and the rear and waveforming? Are we going to use, maybe we're doing Dirac and we're going to use their new art system. You got to think about that up front, because when we start to pick products, at least I need to know that to know how I'm going to do this. For the speakers, what's the layout going to be? Where are they going to be? I'm working on a project right now where the speaker choice that the client is making, the speakers are so large that even though they're a really good speaker, I can't fit them, and I'm going to actually have worse sound in the room trying to use them. So what I need to do is identify an equivalent product that will fit better. And that's a common thing we go through. And then acoustics. You can't forget about acoustics, but you need to think about it not just from the standpoint of how you're going to get the right acoustics in the room, but how are you going to achieve that in a way that's aesthetically pleasing and fits within budget. So designing a dedicated audio room is a key consideration, and I'm going to give you a cliffhanger right here. So this is part 1 of the video, and part 2, we're going to jump into designing a dedicated audio room, where we're going to talk about key considerations for dedicated spaces, avoiding common design pitfalls, and predicting and measuring acoustic performance. Remember, this is really about, you want to design the system up front to have the kinds of acoustic performance that you want to achieve in that room. And then you want to be able to go at the end and measure the room and find that it meets your predictions really well, which is a lot harder to do than a lot of people realize. So thank you for watching my video. Please subscribe to my channel. Please like this video, please comment, but also in the future, let me know if you like this type of stuff, and I'll try to do more of these videos with the presentation. All right, thanks everybody. That's all I got for now. I appreciate you joining the channel, watching the videos. I got more coming, including a part 2 for this.